Good evening, it's Friday, January 13th. Welcome to a new episode of System Update, our new live nightly show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively here on Rumble, the free speech alternative to YouTube. Tonight, we have an exclusive report on a just issued order from the Brazilian Supreme Court, specifically from one judge on that Supreme Court, a judge who is notorious for having constructed one of the most repressive censorship regimes in the democratic world that is shocking in terms of both its breadth and its repression. We will report on that exclusively. The order is written to prohibit anyone from disclosing it. We were on the phones with our lawyers right up until the last minute, ensuring that Brazil's free speech clause in the Constitution permits me to report on it, notwithstanding the order of secrecy, and so we intend to do that. We will also speak with one of the analysts who, unbeknownst to him, has been ordered, or at least the Supreme Court has ordered, all social media platforms, including ones that have no connection to Brazil, to ban him and remove him immediately upon pain of being fined an enormous amount each day for disobedience. This has implications far beyond Brazil for a free internet and free speech globally, as we're about to show you. Now, as always, as soon as we're done with our 1 hour live show here on Rumble, we will move to Locals for our interactive after show to take your questions and comment on your feedback. To obtain access to that show, simply sign up as a member to our Locals community. For now, welcome to a new and exclusive episode of System Update starting right now. We have, on several occasions since our show debuted less than a month ago, reported on what has become the uniquely repressive censorship regime in Brazil, in which a single judge on the Supreme Court has ordered countless people, including elected members of Congress, journalists, analysts, activists, and a whole wide range of others, banned not from one social media platform, but from all social media platforms. And we have explained over and over why it is that this censorship regime is so uniquely threatening. And in fact, although this censorship regime has been overwhelmingly, not entirely, but overwhelmingly directed at the Brazilian right and supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro, it is such an alarming censorship regime that even the New York Times, leading up to the election on two separate occasions, has issued warnings in the form of news reports about how excessive and unlimited this judge's powers have become. And we've reported on that before, but tonight there is a radical new escalation of the censorship regime in the form of a previously secret order that was issued just today. There's nothing about our show that is scripted. We learned of this order just a few hours ago. Spent most of our time consulting with specialists in Brazilian law, but also our own lawyers, to ensure that we are able to report on this. And I have to say, as somebody who has reported in multiple countries, confronted multiple governments, been threatened by governments, there has never been a case in my entire journalistic career where I felt myself hesitating before criticizing a political official the way I find myself sometimes hesitating when I go to question or criticize the powers wielded by this one specific judge, Alessandro de Moraes. That is how repressive and threatening by design this entire censorship regime is. It's not just about banning people from the internet. He has ordered members of Congress arrested, activists and journalists arrested with no trial. People are in exile out of fear of his orders. The entire time, many people, including myself, were concerned about authoritarianism from the Bolsonaro government, given his history, Jair Bolsonaro's history of anti-democratic statements. And there were acts of his government I consider authoritarian, including the government's attempt to imprison me for reporting I did in 2019. But just as happened in the United States, where institutions of power united in the name of stopping Donald Trump and concluded that everything and anything they do, no matter how authoritarian, is justified in the name of stopping Trump, Brazilian institutions, establishment institutions, have done the same in the name of stopping not just Bolsonaro, but the Bolsonaro movement, to the point where all kinds of censorship and imprisonment without due process and searches and seizures of people's homes are being done without even the pretense of due process. So let's get to this new order tonight. I will show you exactly what it says. We don't want to show you the hard copy of the order because oftentimes if you do that, it can reveal who the source is that provided it to you. And since the judge not only issued a repressive order, but within it ordered the targets of this order to keep secret what it was that he ordered them to do and gave them 2 hours to comply, we want to make sure to protect our sources. But as a journalist, I feel I have the right. Though my lawyers made clear it's not entirely 100% clear that I have it, I'm nonetheless taking it to report this and publicize this order, notwithstanding his demand that it be maintained in secrecy. I'm not a party to this order. He hasn't ordered journalists to do so, only these social media platforms. So I want to protect our source. We've translated the order from Portuguese, where it was obviously issued, into English, and I'm now about to show it to you in its full and complete form. So at the top, you can see it on the screen. It notes the investigation number of the case from the federal district, which is where the court is situated in Brazil. You see there the name of the judge, Minister Alessandro de Moraes. He's one of the members of the Brazilian Supreme Court, and then author, prosecutor, investigator, and lawyer. It all says under legal secret. So not even the names of the people who brought this action, who are the lawyers involved. Everything is completely secret upon his order, including the contents of the order itself. Now, it's addressed to 6 different companies. Facebook, and specifically Facebook's company that is Brazilian in nature that operates Facebook in Brazil. That's number 1. Number 2, Rumble, which is the platform on which this show is aired and is currently airing exclusively. The 3rd is Telegram, which is the service that is designed to ensure not only anonymity, but also to protect people's free speech rights from the attempt by authoritarian governments and authoritarian censors to silence them. The 4th is TikTok, the 5th is Twitter, and the 6th is YouTube. So 6 different companies, none of which is Brazilian other than the Brazilian version of Facebook. These are all foreign social media companies, and at least in the case of Rumble, Rumble has no ties to Brazil at all. It has no office in Brazil. It has no marketing campaigns that are aimed at Brazilians. Brazilians are allowed, like everyone else in the world, to join Rumble if they wish. There's a Brazilian program in particular from a very popular podcast host who became the topic of this order, but Rumble doesn't exist in Brazil. It has no bank accounts in Brazil. It has no physical offices in Brazil, and yet this order purports to compel not just Rumble, but all of these other companies to obey the censorship order of a single Brazilian judge. So he's not only acting as censor of Brazil, but apparently of the entire world. The order reads, Mr. Director, it's a loose translation, quote, this is the judge in his order. I hereby communicate to you that the following decision was made in the judicial action, the details of which remain under legal secret for immediate compliance. And you see there, immediate is in all capital letters, which is how it appears in the order itself. So we're not only ordering you to do this and keep it secret, but we're ordering you to comply immediately in the following terms. And here's what the order says, quote, considering the following facts, I hereby determine the expedition of legal communications to the companies Facebook, Rumble, Telegram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, so that within the deadline of 2 hours, he's given them 2 hours to obey, proceed with the blocking of the channels, accounts, and profiles listed below under the sanction of a daily fine of 100,000 Brazilian reais, which is roughly the equivalent of $20,000 a day, and the providing to the Supreme Court of the registration data associated with those accounts, as well as the maintenance of the contents. So the order directs these 6 companies to do 3 things. Number 1, immediately or generously within 2 hours, completely ban not specific posts that have been deemed illegal, but to ban the entire account, to prohibit all of these individuals from speaking on these platforms, whether or not they have violated the platform's rules themselves. That's the first command. Immediately ban all of these individuals from being able to speak on your platform, whether you want to or not. Number 2, provide to us all of the data associated with these accounts. Whatever information they provided to you, their address, their telephone number, their legal name, everything about them, we demand that you turn over to us. And then number 3, we require you to preserve the content of all of these accounts, to keep them, not allow them to be deleted. Even if the people want them deleted, you are required to preserve them all. And then, of course, embedded in that is a 4th command, which is, you may think this is really repressive, you may disagree vehemently with the order we're giving you, but you are nonetheless prohibited from disclosing publicly what we've demanded you to do. So presumably, if they obey the order and remove all of these people, some of whom are elected members of Congress in Brazil, others of whom are journalists and commentators and activists, if those people come and say, why did you just destroy my livelihood? Why did you just take down my page? Presumably, they're not allowed to say it's because we were ordered to by Judge de Moraes. They're required to maintain complete secrecy about the censorship order itself. Now, here then come the list of all the accounts that each social media company is compelled to immediately ban. So under Facebook, here you see the second item is the Facebook page of a Brazilian politician named Nicolas Ferreira. Nicolas Ferreira is a 26-year-old Brazilian who's a supporter of President Jair Bolsonaro. He became a popular social media star on both YouTube and TikTok and Facebook, and he converted that popularity into a successful run for Congress. He was just elected at the age of 26 to the Brazilian Congress. Obviously, he was elected by the Brazilian people who chose him as the person they want representing him in the democratic bodies of Brazil. Not only was Nicolas Ferreira someone with whom I have not just disagreements, but I can't think of a single matter on which I agree with Nicolas Ferreira, other than perhaps the evil of censorship. But not only did he win in his campaign, he received 1.4 million votes. 1.4 million Brazilians in his state voted for him to represent them in Congress, which happened to be, by a good margin, the greatest number of people, the highest vote total any congressional candidate in Brazil received this year. There are tens of thousands of people who run for Congress across Brazil, each trying to represent their state in order to become a member of Congress. And of these tens of thousands of people who ran, this one individual, Nicolas Ferreira, received the most votes of any other candidate in Brazil on the left or the right. And now, by order of the Supreme Court, despite no trial, presumably not having been notified of any of this, just like a person whom we're about to interview, despite being part of this order, was never notified, he is now banned from appearing on essentially all social media sites that have any audience by an order of a single Supreme Court justice who was elected by nobody. That is the list here. The last person on that list of Facebook is a gentleman by the name of Alan Rick. Alan Rick is a journalist in Brazil. He, I believe, is a lawyer. I'll check that. He is a evangelical pastor, and he has been a member of Congress, an elected member of Congress since 2014. They serve 2-year terms. So every 2 years, every 4 years. So every 4 years, they're required to run for re-election. So he was elected in 2014 to represent his constituents. He was re-elected in 2018. And then this year he ran for the Senate, which requires at least 1 million votes in order to win. I don't know his exact vote total, but he was elected to the Senate. So he's now a senator-elect, having moved from the Congress where he served since 2014 to the Senate. He too, by order that has no trial, no due process, is now banned from speaking on major social media platforms by an order of a single judge without due process. Someone who was just elected as a senator. Here on Instagram, you see Monarch, who is I would call him the Joe Rogan of Brazil. Monarch is essentially the most popular podcaster in all of Brazil. he has gathered an enormous following, just like Joe Rogan. He's kind of known for not being part of the right or the left, just like Joe Rogan. He's not part of any party. He kind of modeled his show after Joe Rogan's, in fact. It goes for 3 hours or 4 hours. He usually has a guest or two with whom he speaks. He became so popular on YouTube that every single Brazilian politician, left and right, was desperate to get on his show, just like they're desperate to get on Joe Rogan's. I've been on that show, I think, 3 times, but many, many people, including the highest level politicians, were going on that show. And then Monarch got banned last year from YouTube because he opined that he disagrees with the laws in Brazil that give the government the power to ban certain political parties, including the Nazi Party. He was making very clear he's not a supporter of the Nazi Party. He's not a Nazi. He hates Nazism. He just doesn't think the state should have the right to ban political parties. In other words, he took the position that the United States government and its Supreme Court and Constitution has taken, which is that obviously in the United States, the state has no power to ban political parties, including the Nazi Party. He took that position and said he believes that should be in Brazil, and that was considered such a grave offense that he was banned from almost every single platform, including YouTube, which is where he had made his living. And when Rumble heard about that story, Rumble offered him the platform to move his show to Rumble, the only platform where he could move his show, and he has now moved it to Rumble. He's not part of the Bolsonaro movement. He hasn't been suggesting that anybody go and engage in revolution against the Brazilian government. He's not part of any coup. And yet this order has ordered that Monarch, despite his millions of fans, be removed not just from Instagram, but also you see there from Rumble. So Rumble is where he went to put his show, because Rumble is a free speech platform which believes, unlike big tech, that everyone with views across the spectrum has a right to be heard. Rumble believes it is not in the position of deciding truth or falsity. So Monarch has had his show on Rumble for, I believe, 7 or 8 months. It's gathered a big audience. And now this one single unelected judge in Brazil is telling Rumble, along with Instagram, that they are no longer permitted to host Monarch's show or anything that Monarch wants to say. He is apparently banned from being heard on Rumble, even if Rumble wants to hear him, or wants him to be heard, or wants to give a platform to everybody, including him. Rumble is a company that was founded in 2013 by a Canadian citizen, Chris Pavlovsky. It has offices in the United States. It just became a publicly traded company on the American stock market. But Rumble does not have a physical presence in Brazil. I believe there are 2 or 3 Brazilians who even use the platform. At the same time, Monarch went there, a leftist commentator who lives in a São Paulo favela and has become very popular and well known for reporting on life in the favelas of São Paulo and what favela residents need, also moved his show to Rumble. His name is Farhaz. And so now this judge is telling Rumble, a company that has nothing to do with Brazil, reaching across the world and telling them, you need to remove this person from your platform with no explanation, no allegation that he broke the law, that he did anything else, just an order that you have 2 hours to remove him, or else we're going to fine you every day. How does this judge have the right to go around fining companies all over the world if they don't obey his censorship orders? I don't know what Rumble's position is, but I do know that at least the last time I checked, which was right before I went on air, that page of Monarchs is still up. There's been more than 2 hours since this order was issued, so at least thus far, Rumble has not obeyed this order. But here you see, as well, many of the same people from Instagram, including the Senator, Alan Rick, has been ordered banned, as well as Nicolas Ferreira. And here you see another member of the Brazilian Congress, José Medeiros, who has also been banned from Instagram. Now, I just have to say, José Medeiros, there are very few people I actually come to hate in politics. I'm a harsh critic of many people, but generally I don't take it personally. I don't hate or love anyone in politics or journalism. I save that for my personal life and my family, where I love people or react emotionally. He's an exception, Jose Medeiros. I have contempt for him. I went to testify before the Brazilian Congress in the middle of the reporting I did in 2019, and he said absolutely grotesque things about my family, about my husband. He's a repulsive individual. And yet I am offended at the idea that an elected member of Congress can just be ordered by an unelected judge off of a platform without so much as offering any kind of rationale. Then you see Telegram, which exists to provide secrecy and protection, and you see that Congressman-elect Ferreira has been ordered off Telegram, along with Monarch as well. TikTok, the same thing. Nicholas Ferreira, the person who just got elected with the biggest vote total, Monarch as well. And now you see from Twitter a long list of people, including Monarch, Senator-elect Rick, Congressman Medeiros, Congressman-elect Nicholas Ferreira. I checked at least some of these pages on Twitter right before I came on air, and I believe all the ones I checked have already been suspended. I'm not sure if that was a decision of Elon Musk's or not. I have my doubts about that because when I announced on Twitter that there was this order, Elon Musk responded to me by asking to see a copy of this order, seemingly very interested in what he evidently regards as repression. So whether they were banned automatically by the legal department or whether they're going to be unbanned once Elon Musk learns of the order, I don't know. To be clear, they are banned only in Brazil. So if you are outside of the United States, you can access these people. They're banned only in Brazil. YouTube, many of the same people. Now, what's amazing about this is that, as I said, this order, which I just read to you in its entirety, contains not even citation to a law, no allegation that the person has broken any law, no contention that they've been given due process or tried, they've had any opportunity to defend themselves. A lot of them, this is their livelihood. This is how they earn their living. By they're journalists and analysts. They host shows and are paid for that through their audience. And with the snap of a finger, without any offer of explanation, this judge has said, all these people are to be gone from your platform within 2 hours. Now, here is the final paragraph of the order. Quote, considering the confidential nature of these documents, appropriate steps should be taken to maintain confidentiality. So he's directing these social media sites to keep this order confidential. Quote, with nothing more for the moment, I take the opportunity to renew my vows of high esteem and consideration. Signed, Justice Alessandro de Moraes. Now here you see the senator on Twitter. It says his account has been withheld in Brazil in response to a legal demand. Here, as well as a Bolsonarista influencer, her account has been withheld in Brazil. Here is Monarch, who also has had his account withheld in Brazil in response to a legal demand. Now, as I said earlier, the New York Times, which is not exactly an opponent of censorship, they've been quite supportive of the union between big tech and the U.S. security state in the United States. Most of the time when the New York Times writes about big tech censorship, it's to complain they're not censoring enough. They have a tech unit who are strong believers and agitators and activists for a censorship regime. And most of the time when they write about censorship, it's to say we demand more of it. But here was an article, a great article, not by Brazil's tech team, but by the reporter who is the bureau chief of the New York Times, the chief of the New York Times Bureau. And he wrote this article reporting on this debate, and the title of it was, the New York Times Brazilian bureau chief, to defend democracy, is Brazil's top court going too far? And the subheadline is, Brazil's Supreme Court has acted as the primary check on President Jair Bolsonaro's power. Now many are worried that the court is posing its own threat. In other words, people, as I said, were concerned about Jair Bolsonaro, but as it turns out, according to the New York Times, not me, the real worry is the authoritarianism of Brazil's Supreme Court, and particularly this single judge, and evidently deciding that Brazil can no longer afford to have free speech in light of what he regards as the political dangers of people's opinions. Now, I can tell you for a fact that this judge, Alessandro de Moraes, used to be hated by the Brazilian left. And the reason is because in 2016, the left-wing president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached by the Congress, and that impeachment was upheld by the Supreme Court. I was vehemently opposed to that impeachment at the time. In fact, I created the Brazilian version of The Intercept primarily to give space to the dissent against that impeachment because the entire establishment was united behind it. And the government that replaced her was viewed as, by the Brazilian left, as a coup government, an illegitimate government. Alexandre de Moraes was the justice minister in this coup government, and he ended up on the Supreme Court because he was appointed by what the Brazilian left considered the coup leader, Michel Temer, an illegitimate president, to this court. So they hated him forever. He was also a major advocate of the anti-corruption probe that led to the imprisonment of Lula da Silva. So the Brazilian left hated him until he took on the role of chief censor and began censoring apparently almost everybody who the Brazilian left regards as their enemy, especially Bolsonaro supporters, including ordering members of Congress arrested and journalists having their homes searched and seized. And now he's a hero to the Brazilian left. In fact, earlier this week on Twitter, I questioned whether or not his powers had become too excessive, just like the New York Times did here. And I trended on Brazil on Twitter for 2 days, being accused of being a defender of terrorists, meaning the people who invaded those buildings. Does that sound familiar to you? If you're an American, it should. After 9/11, the climate was created that anyone who questioned what Bush and Cheney were doing in the name of protecting us from the terrorists themselves was a sympathizer of Al-Qaeda or was pro-terrorist. That's the climate that exists now in Brazil. If you question this judge, you will be called a defender of fascism, even though what this judge is most known for is this very extreme censorship regime that was even a bridge too far for the New York Times right before the election. Let's look at what the New York Times said. It's really quite alarming what even the Times said about what this judge was doing. Quote, the Times described a What's Up conversation among businessmen who supported Bolsonaro, and they were pondering whether it would be better for the country if Bolsonaro lost, if the military intervened in order to overturn the election. They were having a discussion about whether that would be a good thing. That conversation leaked, and then this is what happened. Quote, what followed was perhaps even more alarming than that What's Up conversation, says the New York Times, for the world's fourth largest democracy. Federal agents raided the homes of the 8 businessmen. The authorities froze their bank accounts, subpoenaed their financial, phone, and digital records, and told social networks to suspend some of their accounts. The order came from one judge, Alexandre de Moraes, the same judge who just issued that order I read you. The only evidence it cited was the What's Up group message, which had been leaked to a journalist. In these messages, only 2 of the 8 businessmen had suggested they supported a coup. It was a raw display of judicial force that crowned a trend years in the making. Brazil's Supreme Court has dramatically expanded its power to counter the anti-democratic stances of Mr. Bolsonaro and his supporters. In the process, according to experts in law and government, the court has taken its own repressive turn. Now again, it's amazing that it's the New York Times saying that what is repressive in Brazil is not even so much the Bolsonaro government or the supporters of it, but even more repressive, they say, is the repression of the single judge on this Supreme Court in acting against what he considers dangerous speech. Quote, Mr. Moraes, the judge, has jailed 5 people without a trial for posts on social media that he has said attack Brazil's institutions. Let me read this again. Listen to this. This is what's coming to your country. Quote, Mr. Moraes has jailed 5 people without a trial for posts on social media that he said attacked Brazilian institutions. He didn't order them censored, he ordered them jailed with no trial. So do you see why I say that in my entire career as a journalist, the only time I've ever wondered to myself, should I really be questioning or challenging or critiquing this political official, is this person who has gone so far that he's willing to order people imprisoned without a trial for criticizing him. The New York Times goes on, quote, he has also ordered social networks to remove thousands of posts and videos with little room for appeal. And this year, 10 of the court's 11 justices sentenced a congressman to nearly 9 years in prison for making what they said were threats against them in a live stream. Political leaders on the left, listen to this, political leaders on the left and much of the Brazilian press and public have largely supported Mr. Moraes' actions as necessary measures to counter the singular threat posed by Bolsonaro. Remember that video by Sam Harris that went viral? This is what he was saying, that there's a threat posed by Donald Trump that is so singular in nature that anything and everything that's done in the name of stopping Donald Trump, including lying, censorship, deceiving the public, authoritarianism, is justified because the threat posed by Trump is so singular. That's exactly the rationale that has led not just the Brazilian left, but their allies in the corporate media in Brazil, entirely united, just like the American liberal movement and the established media are completely united, in support of what even the New York Times is saying is this extraordinarily repressive judicial regime. The New York Times went on, quote, many legal experts say that Mr. Moraes' shows of force under the banner of saving democracy are themselves threatening to push the country toward an anti-democratic slide. It's the story of all bad stuff that ever happens in politics, said Luciana de Rose, a Brazilian political science professor who studies the politics of the judiciary. Quote, in the beginning you had one problem, meaning Bolsonaro, and now you have two, meaning this censorship regime that obviously and predictably has survived the defeat of Bolsonaro and his departure from the country. Quote, to run the investigation, Mr. Toffoli, a former another member of the Brazilian Supreme Court, tapped Mr. Moraes, 53, an intense former federal justice minister and constitutional law professor who joined the court in 2017, during what the Brazilian left then considered a coup government. In his first action, Mr. Moraes ordered a Brazilian magazine, Cruzeau, to remove an online article that showed links between Mr. Toffoli and a corruption investigation. Mr. Moraes called it fake news. So this right-wing magazine, for which I also harbor a great amount of dislike, they actually were leading advocates of my imprisonment during the reporting what I was doing, published an article purporting to show a link between a member of the Supreme Court and a corruption investigation, and the first action taken by this judge, G. Moraes, was to order that article censored. At The Intercept Brazil, purely in solidarity with their free press rights, we republished that article because we had not been ordered to take it down. So this has been going on for a long time, and my position going back to 2017 was that censorship orders from the Supreme Court against free speech and a free press are highly repressive, even when it was aimed at news sites that not only do I dislike, but that had called for my imprisonment. The article went on. Over time, Mr. Moraes opened new investigations and reframed his work around protecting Brazil's democracy. Mr. Bolsonaro was increasing attacks on judges, the media, and the nation's electoral system. Mr. Moraes ordered major social networks to remove dozens of accounts, erasing thousands of their posts, often without giving a reason, according to a tech company official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to avoid provoking the judge. So that order that I read you, where he just orders people removed at the snap of his fingers with no explanation provided, has been going on for a while, but it takes an anonymous tech official trying to complain about it to the New York Times, and these tech companies are incredibly powerful, but even they are petrified of the power of this judge. They're petrified of criticizing him, to the point where they're only willing to just talk about him publicly if they hide behind anonymity, in the words of the New York Times, to avoid provoking the judge. When you have people scared to criticize a political official out of fear of what he's going to do, order you in prison, censor you, take other action against you, that is extremely unhealthy. Quote, it went on, when this official tech company reviewed the post and accounts that Mr. Moraes ordered it to remove, the company found that much of the content did not break its rules, the official said. So he's ordering these social media companies to ban people and ban content that they themselves say have never violated their own rules. The article went on. In many cases, Mr. Moraes went after right-wing influencers who spread misleading or false information. But he also went after people on the left. When the official account of a Brazilian Communist Party tweeted that Mr. Moraes was a, quote, skinhead, and that the Supreme Court should be dissolved, Mr. Moraes ordered tech companies to ban all of that party's accounts, including a YouTube channel with more than 110,000 subscribers. The companies complied. So let me just explain this. There's a left-wing party in Brazil that considers itself communist. Trotsky, to be specific. They are a vehement supporter of Lula da Silva, this party is. But despite being on the left, they have a principled belief in free speech. And they have been objecting continuously to the censorship regime, even though it's mostly aimed at people on the right, people who this party dislikes. And because they criticized this judge, called him a skinhead, he has banned their accounts as well. If you criticize Alexandre de Moraes, you get banned or perhaps imprisoned, which is why I spent every second up until this show started on the phone with my lawyers. The Times goes on. In many cases, Mr. Moraes went after right-wing influencers. Oh, that's the same part. Mr. Moraes went even further in 7 cases. He ordered the arrest of far-right activists on charges of threatening democracy by advocating for a coup or calling people to anti-democratic rallies. At least 2 are still in jail or under house arrest. Some cases were initiated by the Attorney General's office, while others, Mr. Moraes began himself. So just think about that. Alexandre de Moraes is the target of people's criticism, so he's the victim, in his view, of illegal speech. He then initiates his own legal process to get these people arrested or censored, and then he sits as the judge in his own case, a case where he considers himself the victim, that he himself initiated, and then he judges these people guilty and then orders them unarrested or banned from the internet. In fact, a governor of the federal district, where the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidential palace are all situated, was just ordered removed from office for 90 days based on the allegation that he either failed to provide the necessary security to those buildings or was complicit in their attacks. That's an accusation that I think is potentially true, though I haven't seen evidence for it definitively. But the removal of an elected governor was made by first Judge Moraes and then the entire court without anyone having asked for that removal. They initiated the action themselves and then removed the governor who had been elected. This is the New York Times. You know how repressive, for 90 days, do you know how repressive a censorship regime has to be for the New York Times to write an article like this over and over in one paragraph after the next, saying that however authoritarian and repressive you think Bolsonaro is, the institutions acting against him, in particular the Supreme Court, have become even more repressive? Here was a second New York Times article in October of 2021, just 9 days before the first round of voting in Brazil, that was headlined, quote, "To fight lies, Brazil gives one man the power over online speech." Brazilian authorities granted the country's election chief broad power to order the takedown of online content in a bid to combat soaring misinformation ahead of the election. This month's election. You know who that person is? That single man who they gave total power over online speech was? The same judge, Alexandre de Moraes. Quote, "Brazilian authorities grappling with a torrent of online misinformation granted the nation's elections chief unilateral power to order tech companies to remove many online posts and videos, one of the most aggressive actions taken by any country to combat false information. Under rules passed on Thursday, the elections chief can order the immediate removal of content that he believes has violated previous takedown orders. Social networks must comply with those demands within 2 hours or face the potential suspension of their service in Brazil." That, of course, is the order that we just saw today that is still in effect. He still has these powers even though the election is over. and Bolsonaro gone. Quote, the election chief Alexandre de Moraes is also a justice on Brazil's Supreme Court, which has placed him at the center of a separate fight over the court's increasing authority. As a court justice, he has ordered investigations into Mr. Bolsonaro and jailed some of the president's supporters for what Mr. Moraes said were attacks on the nation's democratic institutions. He has been perhaps the nation's most effective check on Mr. Bolsonaro, who for years has assailed the court, the press, and the nation's election system. But in the process, Mr. Moraes has raised concerns that his efforts to protect the country's democracy have instead eroded it. That's always what it is. When George Bush and Dick Cheney stand up and say, we're adopting all these spying and radical powers in order to keep you safe and protect democracy, they end up eroding it. The Times concluded, the rules allow Mr. Moraes to order social networks to immediately take down the content that he determines has violated previous decisions by the broader electoral court. Earlier this year, he said he planned to block Telegram, just block the entire app, the messaging service with millions of users in Brazil, after the company did not follow his orders to remove the account of a prominent supporter of Mr. Bolsonaro accused of spreading disinformation. Mr. Moraes reversed that ban several days later after Telegram obeyed his orders. Now, the reason why I say this goes way beyond Brazil, why you should be very concerned about this, even if you're not in Brazil, is because this is becoming a global problem, where governments are now reaching out to companies, social media companies on the other side of the world, and demanding that they censor journalists, news outlets, and other voices that those governments want to be censored. Back in November, Rumble was forced to pull out of France because France had ordered Rumble to stop giving a platform to RT and Sputnik and other Russian media outlets. Rumble gives a platform to all media outlets, including American media outlets, who are in favor of the war in Ukraine. They want people to hear that side if they want. They also want people to hear the Russian side through RT and Sputnik. And yet, the French government isn't content just to ban French social media platforms from hosting RT. They told Rumble, either you censor these media outlets that we dislike, or we will ban you from our platform. As a result, when someone in France wants to go watch this show or any other show, this is what they get. Notice to users in France. Because the French government demands to remove creators from our platform, Rumble is currently unavailable in France. We are challenging these government demands and hope to restore access soon. I got an email today, as I've gotten many times before. It says, censorship in France. It's from a French citizen. It reads, Dear Glenn, I've been following your work for years now. Thanks very much for your journalism. I live in France, though, and as you know, when I try to watch your show, this is what I get below, which is obviously infuriating when you think that some bureaucrat in Brussels actually think he or she knows better than me what I should be watching. Isn't it possible to make your show available another way, or at least downloadable, so that we in French can watch it as well? You understand that in every case now where there's a new crisis, Russiagate, Trump's election, the January 6th riot, insurrection, the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, it is immediately exploited to impose all new repression and erode civil liberties even further, which is exactly what is now happening in Brazil. Some protesters in Brazil invaded government buildings on Sunday. They chose to do it on a day when there was no one there, unlike January 6th, where they interrupted the Congress, where members of Congress were in session. There was no violence in the sense that anyone ended up dead or even gravely injured. They did do a lot of damage to government property, including these buildings. You obviously don't want people breaking into government buildings. That is a real threat. But every single time there's a threat, governments immediately put the population in fear, and they say, oh, look, let us have these powers temporarily. We're only using it to protect you. These powers never are temporary. That's why the Patriot Act, justified by Bush and Cheney right after 9/11 as a temporary measure, needed to give them powers previously unthinkable to keep the population safe, 20 years later is still in a part of American law and has no signs of going anywhere. Here you see, from March of this year, one of the most grievous censorship laws passed that I can recall by a democratic country. It was in the EU. They enacted a law making it illegal for any social media platform to allow RT or Sputnik to appear on their platforms. The Reuters article said, quote, Russian state-controlled media outlets, RT and Sputnik, will be banned in the European Union with immediate effect for systematic disinformation over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the 27-country bloc said on Wednesday in an unprecedented move. The sanction means EU operators will be prohibited from broadcasting, facilitating, or otherwise contributing to the dissemination of any RT or Sputnik content. Do you trust your government or the French government or the Brazilian government, over which you have no influence or democratic accountability, to make decisions for you which propaganda as an adult you can listen to and which you can't? That is the regime that is being implemented. And each time some government does something repressive, other governments around the world copy it. The one thing you can't accuse me of is being a fan of the Bolsonaro movement. As I said, in 2019 and 2020, the reporting I did with my colleagues that helped free Lula from prison and proved that Bolsonaro's justice minister had acted corruptly was reporting that they ultimately indicted me on and tried to imprison me on. And the irony of that is that it showed abuse by the judiciary. For 5 years, the critique that I heard from the Brazilian left was, we're living under judicial tyranny, meaning Judge Moro and the anti-corruption probe. And so when the Brazilian government tried to imprison me for reporting on that corruption by the judiciary, that apparently is now off limits from criticism, they copied the indictment of Julian Assange that the United States government brought. The theory that they used to try and imprison Assange is the theory the Brazilian government copied to try and imprison me. Namely that when I cooperated with my source, when I tried to help my source avoid detection, when I encouraged my source to provide more information, according to them and their allegation, I became part of the conspiracy. These governments copy one another. And so when they see this judge in Brazil essentially imposing a repressive censorship regime, unlike anywhere else in the democratic world, that can reach over to other social media companies across the world like France is trying to do, you can be absolutely sure that your government and other governments will see that, see how well it's working from the perspective of crushing all dissent, including dissent against the government, and will begin copying it as well. There's lots of reasons to care about this extremely new disturbing order that was supposed to be secret until we reported it. You should care just on the grounds that people in Brazil deserve free speech and free press rights. But you should also care because a free internet is the most valuable innovation we have against fighting against establishment power and entrenched authorities. And just like the Snowden reporting was about the surveillance that is being done to ruin internet freedom, this censorship is designed to ruin it even further. So that's the picture of what's happening in Brazil, and not just in Brazil, but around the world. And now we're about to interview one of the people who, unbeknownst to him until a few hours ago when I called him, has been ordered by the Brazilian Supreme Court, one judge on it, to have all of his accounts banned by every platform on which he's on. The person I call the Joe Rogan of Brazil, who's the podcaster Monarch. We're going to interview him in just a second. Monarch, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. It's great to see you. I know it's not always comfortable to give interviews in what's not your first language, but I know your English is good, so feel comfortable and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I hope my English is not too bad and you can understand what I have to say. And I need to thank you, Glenn, always helping me in this process in Brazil. We have a very difficult situation here, and I appreciate all the support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as people know, I live in this country for 17 years. My husband is Brazilian, my children's Brazilian. I have a lot of investment in Brazil and the United States and a free internet, and so it's an extremely important cause of mine. So before we get to this order, just In your own words, remind people of what happened. You had a show on YouTube that was an extraordinary success, the most popular podcast in Brazil by a good distance. You had millions of people watching you every night. You had every major celebrity and politician eager to get on your show. And then overnight, you were completely canceled by the Brazilian media, kicked off every big tech platform. Explain what it is that happened.
So in one of the podcasts, I have defended an idea that is constitutional in the America, that is that the government does not need to have the right to ban any political party. And when I said that, people accused me of being a Nazi because I included the Nazi party in my defense. But I did that because I believe that if if we give any opportunity to the government to choose who can have political powers or who can say what they want in the internet, the government will always use this power to abuse it and to ensure that the elite of the political class have maintained his powers.
So, but before I get to the next question, Mark, and that was great. I just want to correct something I said earlier. I think when discussing the Brazilian senator who was just censored on multiple platforms, I think I mentioned that he got roughly 1 million votes in order to win. He's actually from a smaller state. He got around 150,000 votes, and that was sufficient to elect him to the Senate. But he is a senator-elect, and he's now banned from multiple platforms. So, Monarch. You have this program on Rumble that you do after you got banned from YouTube. You took your show to Rumble where you have a very large audience. Although it hasn't become quite as big as it was on YouTube for a variety of different reasons, because including the fact that Rumble's not yet well known in Brazil. But you are on Rumble. You're also on other platforms like Telegram. You're on, I believe, Instagram. And so earlier today, one member of the Brazilian Supreme Court, Alexandre de Moraes, ordered those companies to ban you. Not specific posts of yours, but to prevent you from speaking on those platforms at all, to ban them and to turn over to him any registration data that you provided. When did you learn about this order, and what is it that you know about what the order is?
I just learned about this. You actually was the guy that broke the news for me, so I don't have any access on the legal process included. My channel was censored a time ago, months ago, and in that process, I don't have access to any information. So I believe that in this new process, I will not have any information from the government and not an ability to defend myself. My lawyers cannot find any information that could help me to defend my case. I don't even know what I'm being accused of. This is very unusual. It's not the correct legal process.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I wanted to ask you. So presumably, if you were being accused of breaking the rules of the platform, it would be the platform that would notify you, as has happened to many of us. You know, Twitter says, this post is in violation of our rules, so we're going to suspend you for 12 hours, or we need you to take from this post before you get back on. But I would assume, given that this is a judge who is ordering you banned, that he believes that it's because you've broken some kind of a law through things that you're saying on your shows. Do you have any idea what laws you've been broken? Have you ever been told by Brazilian judges or the Brazilian police or any other Brazilian authorities in the last couple months? I'm not talking about during that episode we just discussed. I'm talking about in the last couple months that you are breaking laws or in violation of laws or in jeopardy of being prosecuted?
No, actually, I don't know about any law that can prohibit it, that can punish me for what I have said in the past months. I never said anything that incites violence. I never did support any type of coup or any type of military intervention. Actually, I was always vocal against it. I believe that we can fix this situation in the law with political activism, and I do not believe in violence in any form.
Yeah, so I said earlier for people who aren't familiar with you, who are outside of Brazil, that you're not a member of the Bolsonaro movement. You've never been identified, nor have you identified as a supporter of Jair Bolsonaro or the movement. You've praised some things, you've criticized others. And that's why I kind of identify you as sort of the Brazilian Joe Rogan. You're a fan of Joe Rogan. You were a fan of his before you even started your show. You've talked about how you modeled your show after Joe Rogan. Talk a little bit about that. What is it that you perceive Joe Rogan as doing that is responsible for his success, that made you a fan? And how did you try and model your show in a way that kind of used his model?
I think that Joe Rogan have the ability to not being used. He is not. He does not advance a certain agenda. He does not have a political agenda that is controlled by other people or by groups. He's a guy who has political independence, so he can talk about many subjects and give his honest perspective about the stuff that he is seeing and or saying. And that I think that this is what captivated me. I wanted to produce in Brazil a type of media that was not a media of militant activists controlled by some party or some organization. I like the free speech of a common citizen, a common people, common person.
Yeah, and I think your show is in particular known for putting on the furthest left-wing politicians. I think you had a couple of members of the Bolsonaro family themselves, if I recall, and supporters of Jair Bolsonaro's movement, and everybody in between. It was kind of a show that was open to every ideology in every political party. Let me ask you, I did check right before I came on and saw that your account on Twitter has been banned and withheld, at least in Brazil. When I announced this order, Elon Musk responded to my tweet. He didn't know about the order. He wanted to understand what its scope was. I don't know whether he's supporting of that decision or not, but have you been able to determine, besides Twitter, which I know for sure has, at least as of the time we started the show, banned your account inside Brazil, whether other accounts of yours are also banned, and have any of these platforms communicated to you now about why they banned your account?
Yeah, actually, all my accounts in all platforms are banned right now.
Including Rumble?
I have no. Actually, the only platform that did not ban me was Rumble, and I appreciate that very much, because if Rumble bans me, I would not have any platform to speak. Rumble is the only platform in the world now that is guaranteeing me my ability to communicate to Brazilian people and to say what I think and what I perceive to happen. So I appreciate Rumble for this.
So you were banned on all these other platforms. Were you notified by any of these platforms that they were banning you and given an explanation about the reasons?
Yeah, I got an email saying that my account was banned due judicial process. So that was an order coming from the Supreme Court, most likely.
So I don't want to intervene in your communications with your lawyers or ask you what you've discussed, but do you know yet what your plans are in terms of challenging this order? Do you know whether you're even able to, given that these processes seem to be secret? Have you figured out yet what your plans are in terms of what you're going to do in response?
Yeah, the fact is that Brazil has no legal process anymore. Even if I want to fight this order, I cannot, because my lawyers cannot even see what I'm being accused of. So how can I defend myself if I don't even know what I'm guilty for? So there's no possibility to defend one oneself here. Brazil is no longer a democracy. We cannot say that anymore. We have one guy who has the power to control what everyone in Brazil can say or cannot say. He has the power to decide who has a platform, and who has the power to decide even if the governor is in power or not. He has absolute power in all institutions of Brazil, in my view.
Yeah, I said earlier that, in my career, I've obviously angered a lot of powerful people and governments and corporations. I've had governments threaten me with prison before. I've had the Brazilian government actually bring charges against me. And never once did I have that sensation of worrying about whether something bad could happen to me if I criticize a politician until, say, the last 12 months, when every time I went to criticize Alexandre de Moraes, I had that kind of involuntary feeling of, wait, should I really be doing this? Is this really worth the risk? That's something I had to think about before we came in and did this show. What is it that he could do to me or take action against me for having reported on this secret order, for having criticized him so harshly as I've been doing and just did again? I'm wondering, I've heard other people say that. Obviously, the official in this major tech company wanted to criticize him to the New York Times, but was only willing to do so anonymously out of fear that he might be suffering retaliation or reprisals from Judge de Moraes for criticizing him. I'm wondering, have you or friends of yours had that sensation, experience, talking about whether it's even safe any longer to criticize this judge?
Oh, of course. In Brazil, we have we are afraid of speaking anytime that we speak in public. That's not only the fault of Alexandre de Moraes, but also the fault of the political censorship that big tech companies are using to control the narrative of societies. So every YouTuber, every communicator, every person on the internet now are afraid to talk. People have to choose wisely the words that they are saying, because they know that if they say something that can be perceived wrong, they will be punished. They will lose money. They will lose the ability to use the platforms, and can even go to jail.
Yeah. Monica, I just want to say, I think what happened to you, as I've told you before, as I've said publicly, was one of the most disgusting and dishonest smear campaigns I've ever seen, where you, as you said, defended a principle that the state should not be allowed to ban political parties. You were asked, does that even include the Nazi Party? And you said yes. It even includes the Nazi Party. That's not a radical position. That happens to be the state of the law in the United States and many other countries. And for defending that principle, the Brazilian media decided to accuse you not of being an advocate of free speech, but a defender of Nazism itself, that you yourself was are a Nazi. You became radioactive for many people to even speak to. I'm sure I'm going to be accused of myself now being a Nazi for having you invited on my show or having gone on your show. I think it's the responsibility, though, of us with platforms who are less vulnerable to those sorts of attacks to stand up against them, because ultimately, if we won't, who will? So I really appreciate the work that you're doing, despite the suffering and the punishment you've already endured and the threats you continue to be under. And I really appreciate your taking the time to come on my show and talk about it. And your English was great.
Oh, I thank you very much. I hope that the American audience can see what's happening here and can educate yourselves more about the problems in Brazil, because I believe that we need your help in fixing this. And I appreciate very much, Glenn. I am a fan, And I hope that we all can continue to work here in Brazil or anywhere in the world.
Absolutely, Monarch. Thanks so much. Have a great evening despite the unpleasant news, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it. That concludes our show. I think you can understand why Monarch is somebody that has become quite threatening to the Brazilian establishment. He is somebody who appeals to people for much the same reason that Joe Rogan does. Whatever else you want to say about him, he's clearly authentic and curious and has developed a pretty coherent way of defending free speech and explaining, and he's kind of a living example of it, of how censorship creates an incredibly disturbing climate of repression. And the fact that people are censoring in the name of protecting democracy, to me, is the ultimate Orwellian distortion. And you see it in that order that I find, although an extension of what's been going on, a new escalation that I expect not to continue only in Brazil, but in many other countries throughout the democratic world that simply fear the ability of citizens to speak freely, which is why they want to control the internet, the one technology, as Monarchy said, that allows us to speak to each other without the control of centralized corporate and state authorities. So that concludes our show for this evening. As always, we are now going to move to Locals, which is the part of Rumble that is a community-based platform that where we have an after show every time we do a show on Rumble, Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. live. Once we're done with the show, we go to Locals. We have an after show. We take questions from the audience. All you have to do to participate is click join in the upper right-hand corner of the page, the red button, and you'll become a member of our local audience. You'll have access to the after show, my written journalism, and much else. For those of you who watched tonight, I really appreciate it. I hope you understand the nature of how severe this censorship regime has become in Brazil and how it's starting to seep far outside of its borders. Hope you'll join us tomorrow night and every night at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on Rumble, exclusively the free speech alternative to YouTube. Have a great night, everybody.